His policies led to the last period we've had of sustained prosperity, a time when the prosperity wasn't just for the 2% or the 1%, but the average wage actually increased consistently when Bill Clinton was president. He negotiated peace in Northern Ireland. He stopped the genocide in southeastern Europe. He appointed the kinds of Supreme Court justices who do the right thing for civil liberties, for women's rights, for labor rights, for everything we need. He knows what's necessary to be done, and he knows the best person to do it is Hillary Clinton, because he knows her very well. So let me introduce the former President of the United States, our great friend, President Bill Clinton.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Congressman Jerry Nadler for his leadership, for his friendship, for his support for Hillary, and for the wonderful work he did when I was president. And I want to thank Representative Carolyn Maloney for the same things. And I thank her for being here. I want to thank the previous speakers. Thank you, Scott Stringer. Thank you, Tish James. Thank you, Cynthia Nixon. Rabbi Kleinbaum, thank you. And I should say to all people of the Jewish faith who are here, happy Passover a little early. Thanks to the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, to the whole community here. And we have a slew of state senators, assemblymen and women, community leaders, and the Manhattan Borough President. And I thank her for being here. Look, I'm very grateful that you're supporting Hillary. And I just want to say the only way to manifest that is in a high turnout on Election Day. New York faces a particular challenge not faced by any other large state. And you should know this. It's the only big state in America that has a standalone presidential primary. And that's really the challenge here. In all the back and forth and who's right about this and who shot John and all that. I'll give you just an example. In 2008, we had a record turnout in New York for a presidential primary. We had two candidates people liked. There was intense support. We had a record turnout. We had a big turnout in Illinois. The home senator won both states. New York is 50% bigger than Illinois and slightly more Democratic. Illinois had 50% more votes than we did. And we had a record turnout because they had the Congress races, the local races, the legislative races. That's our challenge. And this is a really important election. I heard what some of the previous speakers were saying. But essentially, Hillary believes the election is about, first, restoring broad-based economic growth and shared prosperity in a way that reduces income inequality and creates more opportunity. Second, tearing down the barriers, some of which are economic, some of which aren't, so that we can all participate. And there may be some that are surprising to you because we're here. And third, making sure that America moves into a troubled world where many things are falling apart when they should be coming together, with a steady hand that will at least be faithful to our friends and allies, keep big bad things from happening, and hopefully help Europe and other places, including the Middle East, move back from the brink of destruction so that everything we're doing here doesn't get wrecked by things that happen somewhere else, and so that we can restore a trajectory of peace in the world. If you believe that, then I believe of the four remaining candidates, she's the only one that's qualified to do all those jobs. But it's really important to talk to people about what the election's about. Because the reason there's so much intensity for other candidates here is simple if you look at the American map as a whole. When the president gave his final State of the Union address, He said, look, I know we got a lot of trouble at home and around the world, but you should be optimistic for the following reasons. Number one, we are outperforming every other big economy on earth. True. Number two, we've had 14 million jobs in the last 5 years, and that's the most job growth we've had since that other Democrat, whatever his name was. Number three, for the very first time in the entire history of the Republic, we have more than 90% of our people with health insurance. And we ought to finish the job and solve the problems, not start again. And then he said, but there's more if you look out in the future. America has the youngest, most diverse workforce in the world, which is true. I just came here from the Science Museum in Queens, doing an event primarily for Caribbean, Latinos, and other people who live in the neighborhood. Queens is now, of all the urban areas on Earth, not in America, on Earth, with more than 2 million people, the most diverse urban site in the entire world. And Manhattan, the Bronx, and Brooklyn aren't that far behind. And that's a blessing. It's one of the reasons New York is one of the fastest growing cities in America today. He said all that. Then he said we got the best system of higher education and training in the world. We just got to make it affordable, and we got to make the debt that's already been accumulated manageable. And then he said we're the best science and technology base in the world. Buffalo, which was given up for dead, Hillary, she was a senator, went up there and said, you know, you ought to turn this place into a bioscience hub in America. They got 12,500 jobs in Buffalo that are all high-tech, science-related jobs. She was up there earlier this week, and the guy on it said, I'm telling you, she did it. She came here, she had this idea, she got us some money, and we were off to the races. We're remaking the future. So he said that. And then he said, according to all scientific surveys, and our party still believes in science, America ranks first or second in the world in our capacity to generate energy from the sun, the wind, and other renewable sources. And that could we could lead the way in liberating the world from climate change problems and grow the economy in a whole different way. So you shouldn't be afraid. Beautiful picture of the future. Most of us in this room could find ourselves in that picture. Most Americans still can't, because 80% of the country is still living on what they were living on the day of the crash. 8 years. Half of the country, if you adjust for inflation, is living on what they were living on the last day I was president. That's 15 years.
Wow.
I'm, on my mother's side, I'm Irish, and I worked a little on that Northern Ireland peace problem, and we solved it. And so we've been celebrating in the Irish community here in New York the 100th anniversary of the Easter Uprising in April of 1916, which led to the liberation of Ireland after a lot of bloodshed. William Butler Yeats, the great Irish poet, wrote a poem called Easter 1916, in which there is one line that every American of every background can identify with, when he described the horrors and the sort of manic feelings people were having. He said, too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. And he might have added, of the head. Most people don't make very good decisions when they're mad. But you can understand it. You can understand the frustration of young millennials that can't move out of their parents' home because they can't make a rent payment and a college debt payment. I stopped in Manhattan the other night in a little Starbucks. I try to find little coffee shops so I can go in and talk to the inevitably young people who are serving coffee. And we have a conversation that goes something like this. It never fails. How long have you been working here? 5 years, on and off. What's off? She smiles. When I'm going to college. What's on? She doesn't. When I'm paying my debt for going to college. You living at home? She said, oh yeah. My mom can't help me, but at least I get free rent. Otherwise, I couldn't pay my debts. I stopped in this little store where I do business in Mount Kisco, New York, the other day to buy a pair of jeans from a lady I've been doing business with for a decade, and I knew her son had just graduated from college. She's very proud of him. She went to one of the New York schools, and I said, "How's your son doing?" She said, "Great. He's about to get a really good job, and he did well in college. I'm so proud of him." "Has he got any debt?" She said, "Quite a bit." "What's the interest rate?" 9%. I said, "Have you still got a mortgage?" She said, "Sure." "Did you refinance it?" "Yes." "What's your rate?" "Under 4. A college loan's the only loan in America you can't refinance. So anyway, that should explain this. The culturally conservative white working class likes Donald Trump, with whom they have nothing in common. Because, wait. Because they started 35 years ago voting with the Republicans, but they were basically just voting against us. They were against our commitment to LGBT rights. They were against our belief in gay marriage. They were against our belief in universal background checks for guns. And when I was president, we even banned assault weapons and had an ammunition cliff limit. And so they felt like we were elitists, that we were looking down on them. And in this last election in 2014, they voted in record numbers for the Republicans because they weren't doing any better. They didn't think. And they only watched one television station now. So they literally refused to believe that the white working class were the principal beneficiaries of the health care law, the expansion of Medicaid. So they're alienated. So Trump comes along and he basically says, "These other guys have treated you like a cheap date. They'll just take your votes, never do anything for you. And if I got an economic plan, I put a wall up across the Rio Grande River, kick all the immigrants out, give you their jobs. Then I'll send the Chinese products home and you can make that stuff here." They say, "Well, sounds like a plan to me." Now we're laughing. But people who are raw and hungry to take it out on somebody don't look at the fine prints. And we have to do that. Because you can blame your way to the White House, maybe, but the minute you take your hand off of the Bible, taking the oath of office, it's on you. And you have to stand and deliver or not. So the third reason I think she should be president is that she's the best change maker. And that's important. And you know that from her time as senator. So I want to talk a little about that. But let me go back to the economy. Basically, the government's principal opportunities to create good jobs that will raise wages, besides having a national effort to raise the minimum wage, that will raise it everywhere. And congratulations to New York. Your plan and California's plan make the most sense of any I've seen, because they raise the floor a lot and then move toward $15 based on the cost of living in various parts of the state. It's very well thought out. You can do that, and you can help about 35% of the women in the workforce, believe it or not, in America. That's important. We need a plan that changes the way we incentivize corporations to spend their profits. Publicly held corporations are more responsible than anything Wall Street can do now for growing inequality, because 80 to 90% of their profits are going only to shareholders and top management. You know, when I was in law school in the dark ages, we were taught that corporations are creatures of the state, not people, and that they have more or less even obligations to all their constituents, to their customers, their employees, the communities they're part of, and to their shareholders. And there, believe it or not, there's a whole movement in this country called the B Corp movement. You may know what it is, the Benefit Corporation movement. And basically, if you organize yourself as a B Corp, you are advertising to investors. If you invest in us, we'll give you a good return over 3 to 5 years. But we are not going to run this company on quarterly capitalism so that we can incentivize the CEO to make a ton of money by giving the shareholders too much and the workers, the communities, and in many cases, even our customers too little. There are activist shareholders forcing companies in this country today to sell profitable divisions so they can get quick cash and they can get their money out in a year and a day. As nearly as I can determine, she was the first candidate in this race, Hillary was, to say, why don't we give a 15% tax credit for corporations that have genuine profit sharing and lengthen the capital gains holding period before you can get anything, and then if you hold the stock a long time, I don't even care if we go lower. We want companies investing in their people, in their communities, in this country. And this is an especially big opportunity now because of the sea change that's occurred in manufacturing. I was in the Bronx the other day, they're growing manufacturing jobs. And there's a reason for that. Manufacturing is so productive that the same number of people can produce more stuff. Therefore, the most important variables are not labor costs. They are power cost, materials cost, and transportation cost. Since we are the biggest market in the world, her position is, why don't we save the transportation costs and incentivize people to make jobs here? With 3D printers and robots and all this stuff, it's going to be a different world. And a lot of people find it thrilling to work in that space. We can do this, but we have to be smart about it. We can't deny the reality. We have to take advantage of it. And then, if you look at Manhattan, it's Exhibit A of the evidence that 2/3 of all our new jobs in 20 years have all come from small businesses. And Jerry and Carolyn will remember this, but when this crash happened, the Republicans tried to blame me because I enforced something called the Community Reinvestment Act, which basically says, a lot of you know it, basically says that if you take any money out of any community, you have to make some loans there. And we enforced it. 95% of all the loans ever lent from 1975 through 2000 were lent in those 8 years, more than $800 billion. And we had record small business formation. There were twice as many loans to women and minority small business owners from the Small Business Administration in 8 years as in the previous 40 years, and we all grew together. So here's what Hillary's election is hanging on, I believe. It's the mindset of the voters. How many people believe what I believe? We are just this close to taking this economy off like a rocket, where we all rise together again for the first time. Just this close. And I think her jobs ideas are better. I just mentioned two others. Flint, Michigan is not the only place in America where kids have too much lead in their blood because of rusty pipes and contaminated water. Not even close. I can't tell you how many cities I've been in the last 2 months where the same thing has happened. You think how many jobs we could create in America if we took up all the rusty pipes, put down new ones, and gave every child in the United States a healthy future. She wants to do that. Think how many rural areas that feel left out and left behind we could bring in the national economy if we gave them all rapid, affordable broadband. So that whatever their ideas are, they could, for many things, be there or here, as long as they're part of the global economy and part of the national economy. If you do all that, we can really get this going. But there are barriers. Barrier number one, there are too many areas that are persistently high unemployment, low income, impenetrable areas. You need to give people more incentives to invest there. That's what we did in Harlem with the empowerment zone when I became president. When it was, to give you an idea, you say it won't work, unemployment rate in Harlem was 24% when I took office and 8% when I left. So Hillary says, if it worked there, it'll work in Appalachia, it'll work in Indian country. The Native Americans on reservations are still the poorest people in this country if they don't have casinos. But they have unlimited capacity to generate energy from the sun and the wind, make themselves energy independent, sell it to other people, and diversify their economies. We can do this. And this clean energy gig, it isn't just for California, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. The wind blows hardest from the North Dakota border with Canada to the West Texas border with Mexico. In other words, where the people are not. So you got to redo the transmission lines in an efficient, sensitive way to take the power to where the people are. But if you do it, it's a lot of jobs. And to give you an idea of how economical it is now, because our Republican friends always say, oh, you know, we subsidize fossil fuels from now to kingdom come. 3 states already generate more than a third of their electricity from wind. Minnesota, Iowa, and Texas. Texas.
Yep.
Yes, when no one's looking, they're tree huggers. And the initial bill giving them incentives to do so was signed by George W. Bush when he was governor. So I always tell him, I really like it when you were in your proto-socialist phase there, doing that. But look, it's a big deal. We're laughing, but it's a big deal. New York has the highest electric cost per kilowatt hour in the country, 13.9 cents. Who has the lowest? Iowa, 5.8 cents. Why? Because of that wind power. And it's the only thing that those conservative Republicans in Congress in Iowa, all except Steve King, he's still with them on everything, but the rest of them won't vote with the Republicans to take away the wind energy because all their farmers are making a killing out of it. And even the sun's not just for California. They're first, but New Jersey is second in the number of solar panels installed. We can do this everywhere. Then you got to take down the barriers. The first are the areas left out and left behind. The second is we got to do something about this prescription drug and heroin epidemic. And Hillary was the first person to say, I want to spend $10 billion to incentivize people to invest in these areas, but they're also the areas that have the highest rate of heroin and prescription drug addiction. West Virginia has the second worst economy and the highest rate of addiction. So we have to treat this like a public health problem. Here's some good news. The Senate voted 94-1 10 days ago to do just that. Now, we don't have any money for it yet, but we can get it. There's a willingness to do this. We got to deal with that. We have to deal with the fact that too many of our young people feel like they can get shot going down the street because of their race. And what should we do about it? Well, we need the police, don't we? If you look at San Bernardino and what happened out there, you ought to go back and look at the films. You can find them online and see those police officers going in time and again, trying to save people's lives. They didn't care what their race, their religion, their gender, their sexual orientation was. They were throwing themselves against the wall, risking their life. We need police reform and police. What's the answer? More of what I often see in the places in New York where you have the healthiest relationship. You need more police on the street that look like the people are policing. Everywhere in America. You know what happened in Ferguson, Missouri? They were in all that military stuff. You need to get people out of that. Walk in the streets. We need neighborhood dispute resolution so that when somebody gets hurt, the neighbors meet with the police and can bring the supervisors there if they need. And they agree on what happened. And then they agree on what to do about it. It actually exists in places in America. And I know a lot about it because we work so hard to put these community policing officers out there. We've got to fix this. First, the reform. When you take the video cams, which are good, they have to be put in a place where they can't be tampered with, so people can know that the evidence has integrity. And that will make a lot of difference to people. But the most important thing is to stop these kids from getting hurt in the first place. You know, selling illegal cigarettes on the street in New York is not a capital offense. And I say that because they may not have intended to kill that man. They violated procedural rules with the chokehold with a very heavy guy who clearly had cardiovascular issues. But people do stuff like that when they're scared, when they're alienated, when they feel like there's this vast divide, and we got to get rid of it again. You know, when I left, one of the things I was proudest of is that approval of government was at an all-time high, the highest rate since right after World War II. We got to do that again. We got to make people believe that it's theirs, and they can trust people. We need prison reform. You know, a year ago this month, I went to the NAACP, and they supported, almost all of them, the crime bill in 1994 because they wanted the police on the street, they wanted the assault weapons ban, and they wanted what the Republicans derisively called my night basketball program, giving young people on the street something to say yes to besides membership in dangerous gangs. But the prison thing was overdone. You got too many people in jail for too long for nonviolent offenses. I discovered it at the end of my term with what are called famously the girlfriend cases. All these young women who wouldn't rat out their boyfriends who were doing drugs, then the guys would cooperate, and they sent the women to jail for longer than the men. So we started getting them out. President Obama is trying to accelerate it now. But we need action, legislative action, so the federal government can set a standard. I believe we only have about 10% of the total incarcerated population in federal prisons. Only 7% of them are violent. We can do a good job here of shortening sentences, saving the taxpayers money, reinvesting in education and training. And you have to do that because you don't want to open the door and have them come right back in because there was no education, no training, no job placement, or because they had to check some darn box that said they'd been in prison and you could fire them anyway. I think we should stop that. We need to let them take a second chance and begin again and do that. And that's Hillary's program. So we need to do these things. We still got some other barriers. If anybody had told me 17 years ago when we started pushing for the employment non-discrimination bill that we would have the Supreme Court legalize gay marriage before we protected people in the workplace from discrimination, I literally wouldn't have believed it. It's a wonderful thing. But it's a terrible thought to think you can get married on Friday afternoon and fired on Monday morning. And we have to fix that. That's a barrier to participation. The lack of equal pay, paid leave, and affordable child care is a big barrier. We are not in the top 10 in women's participation in the workforce now. We've got to fix that. You can't ask people to choose between being successful at raising children, society's most important job, and going to work. If you have to choose, you read before you start. We've got to fix that. But if you take down the barriers and you do this, I believe we can all rise together. As long as we can manage a very difficult situation. A lot of people have forgotten this, but when I came to New York in 1992 to be nominated, I had run the whole campaign on reducing income inequality, raising middle-class wages, and giving poor people a chance to work their way out of it. The difference was, fundamentally, there was no crash. So it didn't take 10 years to get over. And the world was much more of an open field. I was the first president to be able to serve right after the Cold War. The president here has no learning curve to him. Things are drifting apart in dangerous ways. You look, a lot of you come from different places. In Hungary and Poland, two countries that are free today because the United States led the coalition in the Cold War that stood up against the Soviet Union, have now voted for Putin-like models, basically right-wing populism, deeply anti-immigrant, because they're scared. The German chancellor, a woman I quite admire, took all the Syrian refugees she could take because they had the richest economy in Europe and thought they should. She promptly lost the midterms, her party did, not to the Social Democrats, to the right-wing populists, because they're scared. Lebanon, that had survived against all the odds by having shared governance, something I wish our friends on the other side would learn something about, is now 1 million, as little as it is, 1 million Syrian refugees. Jordan, the most moderate and democratic of all the monarchies in the Middle East. No oil, no resources. has already a Palestinian majority, 70,000 Egyptian refugees from the reaction to the Arab Spring, and now they've got hundreds of thousands of Syrians, so their aggregate is almost a million. It's an unstable world. You can't put somebody in there who doesn't understand how important this is. And I'll just say this, I just went back to Israel for the 20th anniversary of Yitzhak Rabin's death. We still had 100,000 people in the square named after him in Tel Aviv who still believe that they can make peace. But we can never have a peace there unless the United States is both pushing for it and the Israelis believe we really care whether they live or die. That we will never let anything happen to their security. If you don't do both, you can condemn all you want, but if you have no trust, you can't be a peacemaker. You got to vote at the UN, that's about it. And I don't want to denigrate a vote at the UN, but I'm just telling you, if you want something done, you need to have somebody that knows who's there, understands the politics, understands the psychology, understands what has to be done, and cares about the country so that we can have some chance to restore the peace process. And so, I don't think it's close. But these two candidates, each in their own way, have added something significant to this campaign. I think it's great that all these young people are involved, even though I think they're wrong. But that's democracy, isn't it? I'm glad they're involved. It's democracy. I think that they voted together 93% of the time in the Senate. And on the times they disagreed, I actually side with her, and I think most of you would. I think she was right to vote for Senator Kennedy's immigration reform bill in 2007, because we'd have about half the problems we got now if we had done that. You'd have all these undocumented people legalized in America. Their children wouldn't be afraid of being thrown out of school. They'd be on the way to a path to citizenship. I think she was right about that. I think she was right about the need for universal background checks and extending the online sales. And about the need not to immunize, make the gun manufacturers the only industry in America that can't be sued for negligent conduct. And so I think nothing. But the important thing is, I don't really think that's why all of these members of Congress, including Barney Frank, the author of the Dodd-Frank bill, which is, I don't care what anybody else tells you, the toughest legislation we have had in ever to stop Wall Street from bankrupting Main Street. Manhattan is booming, and yet there are 50, 60,000 fewer people working on Wall Street today. Maybe one of you knows the exact number, but a lot fewer, at least 50,000, I think more. Now we're working there on the day of the crash because you don't have these risky things. Hillary says the one problem is we haven't clearly covered hedge funds taking the same kind of risks, and that's what I want to do. And that's one of the reasons that Barney Frank endorsed Hillary, because he says she understands this bill, she understands what needs to be done, and she understands we don't want to go back and fight the last war, we want to fight the next one. It's one of the reasons that Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winning liberal economist for the New York Times, has repeatedly said she has the best plan for overthrowing Wall Street. And so, where they're different, I agree with her, but the main thing is, that's not really why all these people are endorsing. I'll give you an example from my own experience. She got these massive votes in the South. She got a big African-American vote, but she carried the Latino vote in the South, she carried the white working class vote, she carried every demographic group. Why? Because they live with the opposition in personal terms, right? When most of them live in smaller areas, modest-sized cities, nobody's under any illusion that if we can just run over everybody and make things happen. And it was interesting because they also defeated in this last election, 2014, an enormous number of Democrats who voted for the health care bill. So when they endorse Hillary, they kind of creeps them out when somebody says they're a member of the establishment when they gave up their seat in Congress so that these young people could stay on their parents' health insurance plan until they're 26. One of the nicest ones was my senator from Arkansas, Mark Pryor. He at least knew he was going to lose, and he voted for it anyway. Because when he was a child, he had cancer. And his father was a governor and a senator. And he said, I would have died if I hadn't had the kind of health care I had. I've lived to raise 2 children. I've had a wonderful life. I hate to give up my seat, but I'd hate it worse if I turned my back on the only chance we've had in my lifetime to go to universal health coverage. He voted for it, he got beat. So he's the nicest man you'd ever want to meet. So he goes with us sometimes in campaigns. Here's his speech, the shortest speech anybody gets really. I know both these people. I like them both. I serve with them both. But if you want to get something done, you better elect her, because she's the best I ever saw. That's why the Human Rights Campaign, Planned Parenthood, the Latino groups, the Black Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, the League of Conservation Voters, all these people endorse her, including the governor of Vermont, who is the only governor breathing who actually tried to implement a single-payer system and had to give it up because it was going to double the budget of the state. And the senior senator from Vermont, Pat Leahy, who is the Senate's most important advocate on human rights. This is about doing something. If you believe this is close.